I'm watching the events of last year and I can't help but see that we are at a crossroads. Something is changing in a big way, and big tech is at the forefront. Most of us are asleep at the wheel. Some of you, including young people, are feeling that something isn't right but can't really pinpoint the source of discomfort in our current world. And I'm not talking about the weirdest ever year from COVID-19. I'm talking about the direction of society. It's changing, and we're headed for a new kind of world that perhaps we did not foresee. I want to explore this with you. This is not a how-to tech video, but hopefully it will make you think and question what is happening around you. So stay right there. I'm on the platform Odyssey.com, and last I looked, I'm now the top software tech guy on there. Just for insurance, in case I get the platform, please follow me there using the link in the description. I have a VPN service, Bytes VPN. I also have a Brax router, which is a VPN and Tor routing device. I made these products because we privacy-minded people need them. We're just a little company, not a conglomerate, and supported by a real face. Your support of our products supports this channel. If you're interested in them, they are on my app BraxMe. The link is in the description. When we were little kids in grade school, our teachers made sure to tell us that our grades and our records will be used to judge us when we get older. And this was used to make us behave according to the rules of the school and the school administration. We had no say-so because even our own parents confirmed that these grades were extremely important to our future. In reality, we adults now realize that our grades in grade school, high school, and even college didn't really matter. Often we are judged based on our current jobs, and maybe the job right before that. But no one really knows what your grades were, or what kind of parties you did in college, or all the pranks you did in high school, or how you screwed up at your first job. Yes, we are what we are today based on our experiences and choices we've made in the past. But we are human beings, and as people, we can actually change. We change opinions, we change behavior. Sometimes some life-changing event can make us shift gears. Sometimes having a partner or having kids affects our viewpoints. Sometimes having some big financial need brings us to a new realization. I've seen kids who were mean bullies as young kids turn into really responsible adults. I've seen troublemaker teens who turn out as very stable members of society. I've seen grandfathers who present an image of strictness and discipline, and I know that their own youth was about as troublesome as can be, yet they turn out to be beloved and appreciated grandparents. We all have the capacity to change. But this is now a thing of the past because a new society is evolving, and this new society is based on centralized, permanent data, and everything you do is now carved in stone. The internet will not let us change. The internet will define us forever based on data collected since childhood. We're being led quietly into a new kind of society where we will be judged based on some criteria decided by a few, the few that control the permanent data. What data? Historically, data has never been this centralized. Data is kept in paper records, which are then archived after some years and never seen again. For example, if you're older, who's going to find your grades in grade school? Your old photos are kept by you and your friends and kept in albums which few will ever see. Or even going a bit modern here, you may have your photos kept in hard drives or DVDs and stored by your friends and family. Likely that will collect dust somewhere and will never be seen much again. When you change employers, a few years will pass and then your paper human resources file will be archived and retrieved only if there was a legal reason to do so. Again, filed away with little chance of getting seen ever again. That was the old way. What has changed, folks, is data centralization on the internet. Data that is not just stored in forever electronic databases. This data is indexed and easily retrieved. Data that can be sorted and identified precisely to each person. This is the reality of this generation, and this has grave consequences because it will be a world we have never seen before. Data has been collected for a long time now since computers have gotten more advanced. In a lot of ways, the precursor to what is happening started with credit reporting. When I was young, my older coworker told me that the first thing I have to establish in my youth is credit. So the way I have to do that is to start borrowing money. It's interesting that the first lesson for me as a young adult was not to save money for a rainy day, but that to function in this society, you have to play the game of credit. Even if you can afford to buy a car, you had to get a loan, so you establish credit. And the credit score pretty much controls how we behave financially in society. This is probably the first use of a social score to impact behavior. I watch some channels on YouTube about van life or cruising sailors in the Caribbean or off-grid tiny homes, and basically they are living against the grain of society today, which is that you get a job, get paid bi-weekly, and then you buy things and pay it off monthly. This is the society that generates the money for the banks and powerful people, while most stay enslaved because they didn't think to save money and perhaps hold their desires for objects at a later time. I'm curious if this kind of regulated version of life is what we wanted, or if inherently people were unhappy but couldn't state exactly why. We just call it the rat race, and we kept doing it till the day we retire. This kind of similar change is happening now with our internet data. It's an extraordinary time. We have willingly agreed to big tech collecting our data in centralized databases, just like the credit score. And this is much more robust than just talking about credit reporting. This is data about ideas, desires, opinions, behaviors, and real events. And we are sharing it with a central entity. And strangely enough, we do this without complaint. Maybe because we think there's no consequence. This data collection starts with our search activity on the internet. Each search classifying our thought process, determining what we want to learn about. Google, of course, now controls most searches in the world. Google Search is the #1 search platform, and YouTube is the second most used search platform. Each website that we visit is tracked and recorded using techniques like advertising trackers and browser fingerprinting. Third parties are now able to tell that the same person is visiting a particular website. Each time you type a domain on your browser, that domain search is tracked and recorded. Recently, under the guise of privacy and encryption, Google has centralized the DNS queries of practically every Android. They call this private DNS, or DNS over HTTPS. Sounds like they're privacy oriented, right? But the point of private DNS is to actually aggregate all the DNS queries on Android so they go to Google. Yes, you could change this setting, but most people will leave it alone. Google has made such inroads into schools that most schools now use Google Apps and Chromebook. Again, seemingly benign, but what happened here is that young kids in grade school now post all their school data with their real name and more on Google Docs. Files are shared in school using Google Drive. No one thinks of this at all. No one makes any observation that, hey, this data is centralized. Would you have thought in the past to store all your documents in a central government database? Yet we are quite willing to do it today. If you have an Android, which is the majority of the world, you are free to use Google Photos on your phone. Again, all benign. Hey, Google's giving me free storage for my photos. Who can complain? But photos are facially recognized. They are scanned to see people's connections and people's locations. Photos, of course, have location data built in, and most people don't realize this. So again, quietly, platforms like Google, Facebook, and Apple accumulate so much information on your life and connections from these centralized photo platforms. Another major inroad for big tech, including Google, is the use of speech AI, where your voice is captured and used in Google Assistant, Google Home, Amazon Echo, Siri, and others. Of course, no one ever thinks of this, but the Google Speech AI resides on a central server, which means that if you dictate a memo on your phone, you've basically given a copy of your memo to Google. and you've allowed a central player to potentially listen in to conversations. One of the biggest successes of Google has been with Gmail. Imagine it is likely that 80% of the world use Gmail. It could even be a higher percentage. People often have many Gmail accounts. It seems like such a great service for the helpful Google to be providing us with free email. Except that now everything happening in your life shows up in some way in email. A job acceptance or rejection, a college application, a loan status, banking data, work activity, social media, even personal interactions. Think of what 20 years of email looks like for yourself. Except change this equation. Think of a single entity, or maybe two, the state and Google, seeing all your emails for the last 20 years. I know most of you will say you don't care, but you're not being true to yourself. Have you actually allowed other people to read your emails over 20 years and then allowed them to judge you based on what they saw? Yes, Google reads your emails just like Facebook reads all your Facebook Messenger messages. Yes, this information is used to feed you ads. Once they learn about your interests, likes, and dislikes, that does happen. But unfortunately, it won't and can't stop there because the genie is out of the bottle. Your emails will profile you and will clearly classify you based on thoughts and beliefs, which has a lot of benefits to big tech. Next, let's talk about location. I remember when GPS units became commercially available, and I would use GPS when sailing. I did a lot of yacht racing back in the day, and we would look back at the GPS track and see what we actually did on the race course. Now, without any input from you and me, Google and Apple collects data on every move just like that handheld GPS. Don't believe the crap that you can actually control this with permissions because they're lying to you. They have always been able to collect locations. They have always been able to do geofencing, meaning find out who's in a certain location at a certain time. In fact, this is regularly used with search warrants. Location data would seem like benign data to many of you. Yes, Google tracks that you went from your home to work, to the market, to the restaurant, and so on. We remember the basic stuff. But Google also remembers when you visited the oncologist or your lawyer. Google knows when you were at the strip bar, at the gay bar, at the riot. Google knows you were at the protest, even if you were just passing by. In fact, some people would probably have broken marriages just from having a location database of everywhere you've been in the last many years, and perhaps places you haven't told someone else. One of the new ways of tracking now is via Bluetooth, otherwise used supposedly for contact tracing. But now all of you have accepted the technology and no one complains. So if Google or Apple decides to do contact tracing, not just for COVID-19, but for any other purpose of their choice, you will never know. The newest to the inventory of data collection tools is now Fitbit. Google just completed the purchase of Fitbit in 2021, and it was done with the agreement with the EU that the data from Fitbit will not be sold to third parties or used for advertising. But yet Google paid $2.1 billion for something that they cannot use in their ad business for 10 years? Anyone wondering why Fitbit could be useful? This segues into the understanding of how Google and others need to collect centralized data. Companies like Google and Facebook understand that raw data alone is not sufficient. They need to be able to index the data and classify them. So the collection of data is actually based on a set. And the set is data plus identity. So a photo itself is data, but it needs an identity. So it needs to be associated to Jose Rodriguez. Otherwise, it is useless. Or the photo can pass through facial recognition and determine a match with Jose Rodriguez. A Google Drive document is not of much use, but if they know the document is owned by Jim Pryor, then it would be more valuable. How does Google gain identity from the data? In many ways, it is easier for Facebook to collect this data because Facebook has your real name, a crowdsourced identity verified by your friends, family, and classmates. Google doesn't necessarily have a real name, but they have multiple tools at their disposal to add identity to the data. The number one Google tool to determine identity is the phone. Because the phone is a personal device, it is a certainty that your identity will be precise. For one, a Google Android is logged in with a Google account. So the collection of data is indexed first and foremost by the Google ID on your phone. Then with Google Play, your credit card with your real name is associated with your Android phone. And of course, the phone is verified to come home every night to the same location. The phone is also tied to Google by telemetry. Every time you open an app or get notifications, Google is always aware of the phone, where it is and what it's doing. So the phone is a surefire way of verifying who you are when you use your Google ID anywhere on the internet. That same phone can cross-index to your email content. Of course, a Google ID is also an email account, so if you're like many people who don't think this through, you've basically tied all your data with a nice ribbon. Yep, I'm here, Google, get my data. Now, I mentioned Fitbit, and we were all wondering what the purpose is of Google buying Fitbit if they're supposedly not able to use Fitbit data for advertising. Fitbit is the second largest player in the wearables market. Now that Google owns it, I'm sure the market share will increase and more people will rely on Fitbit, perhaps taking business from Apple Watch wearables. Fitbit, if you didn't know, is a biometric device. It also tracks your health data. So one of the characteristics of Google's moves is to combine data capture with identity capture. A Fitbit device would uniquely identify you to Google. It is an identity device. Now, what happens to the traditional ways of tracking using cookies, browser fingerprinting, and IP addresses? Well, Google has announced that it intends to move away from those methods of tracking, which those of you who are not aware will think Google is doing some good thing. The reality is that they can dump the cookies, browser fingerprinting, IP address tracking, because those approaches are getting unpopular and they don't really need them at Google at all. And as a side benefit, third parties will be denied the ability to collect data on you while increasing the data that can be collected by Google. But what is the point of all this, and why do you need to understand this? One of the results of centralization of data that is indexed by identity is that the data can be stored forever. All it takes is one party like Google or Facebook to do that, which they are doing. Earlier, I mentioned that one of the worst effects of the internet is that it's permanent. I've seen people post details about their lives that are so deeply personal and yet they're willing to leave posted forever, like public family fights on social media, or accusations of rape in public, or even public views of someone's relationship as a young adult. Most of these people have no realization of permanence, that whatever they post on their social media accounts will be known about them forever. Even political views are heavily posted, and yet opinions of a youth on various topics will undergo change as they mature, and often ideas will be tempered over time. But there's the problem. The internet is unforgiving and the central collection of data is absolute. So whatever you said on the internet is said forever. Whatever you say will be used to judge you, perhaps decades later. We see this in the lives of politicians, and data collected about them has been imperfect in the past. But in the future, there will be no escape. The only politicians who will survive will be those who were good at hiding their true beliefs and ideas. And that's a scary thought. When the internet first arrived in the 90s, it was supposed to be democratic access to information and data. It was supposed to take the monopoly of news reporting away from the major networks. It was supposed to make each of us a potential reporter of news events. But it hasn't turned out that way, has it? Now data is completely centralized and being more centralized in the hands of big tech as well as in the hands of government. This also means the power to manipulate the information is under the control of a very few. I haven't talked about data manipulation so far, but that may deserve another separate video. There will be a complete life record of every person, and in some cases from before birth, as parents memorialize their child's life from pregnancy on Instagram. It's sad that we've allowed this to happen. Now the permanent record of each of us is in the hands of a few. The knowledge of each of our thoughts and desires are in the hands of a few. The view of our behavior is in the hands of a few. The flow of information to us is in the hands of a few. And this data cannot be canceled, corrected, or modified. we are now going to be classified not just by a credit rating, but according to a cohort group that Google will assign to us. Google calls it the Federated Learning of Cohorts, flock, and the next generation will be classified from birth. We will then likely get a social score based on what cohort we belong to. This artificial profiling will be worse than any racial profiling you can imagine because the classification will be based on who's for us and who's against us. There will be rules for society and acceptable behavior, and those who do not toe the line will get punished in society. They will be banned or even silently shadow banned and will affect people in opportunities and finances. Those who do not fit some standard of behavior or promote a standard of behavior that's against the will of the powerful will be censored. Who will the powerful be? The ones who control the data. Remember what I said earlier about the fact that people can change and do change. That part of humanity will be stripped away from us. I was in a deposition once where my entire life was examined and words I said from many years before were dissected and misinterpreted. And you will find in this situation that if you're not sure about yourself, you will feel a constant need to justify your past behavior. That, my friends, is the feeling of having your data collected from the beginning and harvested by some central party like Google. I know some of you are feeling a discomfort, like something isn't right, something is fishy, and you're not completely accepting of the fact that I'm giving you a heads up. Someday someone will watch and listen to what I say and wonder why the majority didn't pay attention. Something is happening, folks, and it is not good. We need to be aware of how our data is being centralized and pull back. We need to be conscious of how our identities actually make the data useful, and by knowing how to manipulate that identity on the internet, we can actually make the data become meaningless. We need to understand how the centralized data works so we can feed it this information. We need to reject this new idea of a data-controlled society that I fear will be worse than living with communism. We need to be aware that our data on the internet is permanent, and for once, what we were told as grade school kids about our grades will end up to be true in real life after all. I hope that you enjoyed having some intellectual stimulation and that you subscribe to this channel so you can hear more. This is a tech channel, of course, and mostly we get deep into tech details. But sometimes we need the big picture. Thanks for watching. See you later.